Hello and welcome, I'm Jay.
And I'm Robbie.
And you're joining us for episode 7 of Generations Apart, the podcast where we talk about gaming and technology across the generations, sharing our perspectives on the past and our excitement for the future. Today, we're talking all about the PSVR 2, both of us now having had multiple hours in the headset, enjoying many games. We wanted to share our first impressions, our thoughts on the hardware, and also some of the exciting software that's available. So before we get into that, we will shortly be doing our usual piqued your interest slot, but we wanted to call out for those who are watching on YouTube and those that may want to go over and look at a YouTube video, is that we are together for the first time recording our first podcast. So Robbie has travelled the breadth of London, England, to join me in my home office, in my man cave, and we're going to be recording our first podcast here and a couple of others for future release, so keep an eye out for those. But Robbie, before we get into the topic of today and the PSVR 2, what has piqued your interest this week?
I'm going to be cheeky and I'm going to say actually coming down here and checking out your man cave has been the peak of my interest this week. There's so much here that is interesting to talk about. There's obviously the arcade machines here. There's lots of retro games. I really enjoyed learning a lot about the Nintendo 64. And of course, the most recent edition, this Metal Gear Solid Tubbs duck. This kind of bath duck that I've gifted you for your birthday this week.
A fabulous addition to my Metal Gear Solid collection, so thank you very much for that.
Well, I had to get something I didn't think you'd have already.
It's class, it's great, I love it. And a bit of foreshadowing there in terms of the N64. If you're into that console, keep an eye out for a future episode where we go through my collection and my memories of the games that I've got in my retro N64 collection.
So Jay, what's piqued your interest?
What piqued my interest? So as is becoming my habit, it's on topic. So I found something this morning actually that I thought was quite interesting while browsing the news, and it's a VR accessory. That's one for the future. You might want to pull your phone up and let you have a look at it. We will share some B-roll on the video, and we will of course put a link in the show notes. But this particular device is called Free Aim VR. And they are a pair of natural walking shoes for virtual reality.
Oh.
So you may have seen the omnidirectional tracks that you can stand on.
Yes.
That require special shoes and you kind of belt it in. This is trying to free you of that. And these are effectively what look like some sort of cradle that goes on your shoe. They have an omnidirectional track. They're battery powered. And as you walk forward, they effectively walk you backwards with a little track.
That's so weird.
One place. Yeah, they are really interesting. They're not available for purchase. This is very much sort of a proof of concept at the moment. They are looking to start selling them at some point in the future, whether that's via some sort of a crowdsourcing campaign or whether they'll just be released to market. There's a couple of interesting videos, so do suggest you click the link in the show notes and go and have a look at this. Robbie can't hear the video because he's quite rightly kept the audio down. They are quite loud, so when I watch the video, it's like as you're walking, which I guess could be slightly distracting. But if you've got headsets on, you're probably not going to hear it. They look very interesting, very clever.
They look a bit like skates, but purposely built skates so you don't move forward.
Skate you backwards, and interestingly, if you look at the FAQ section, there's people have said things like, "Aren't they slippy? Aren't they difficult to sort of maintain your balance on?" Apparently, they don't move when you're not moving. So there's no movement in the wheels. It's not like you're rolling backwards and forwards trying to stay upright. These things only move as you move, and they keep you in one place.
That's amazing.
By reversing you the same distance that you step forward, and then as you change direction, they've got like a track on the bottom that will sort of twist left and right to help you turn. But they're designed to make VR more immersive and allow you to move around in one spot.
Incredible.
So, there you go.
Well, when are you getting these then, Jay?
I must admit I avoided the temptation to sign up for the newsletter in order to find out when they're released, because I thought that's probably dangerous. I mean, to be honest, for me, they're probably not going to be that useful because I suspect they will be PC VR, which I don't do a lot of.
I saw in the video it looked like a PlayStation 2 VR. Someone was using that.
Really? Oh, no, that's worrying. I don't know how that would track, though. I don't know how that would work, because surely the camera needs to be moving. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how they work, and it's just really, I think, going to be the rise of these kind of accessories and technologies now that are going to come in. Apparently the shoes are also going to have haptic feedback. So
right.
I don't know whether they would give you sort of like a a sort of textural feeling if you're walking on a certain surface.
A bit like the
how that's
PlayStation 5 controller. You can feel different textures
yeah,
of what you're walking on
the triggers. Yeah, I mean, who knows where it might go, but I thought it was a bit of fun. And
impressive.
On brand for today's conversation.
Impressive. I feel like here that would be a very useful thing because I know there's not a lot of movement space that you get.
Yeah, I'm a bit limited in here. I haven't quite got enough to do proper room-based VR, even with the PSVR 2, because it requires a 2x2 meter space. I've got more than 2 meters length, but not enough in the width of the room. Yeah. The arcade machines, unfortunately, are a bit of a sacrifice. Would have to be sacrificed. Sorry to
worth it though.
Make room. Yeah, they're not going anywhere. If you haven't seen it already, and you're quick to do so, you can go and watch our Twitch stream. Because last night we did a 4.5 hour stream where Robbie, a hero, spent 3 hours in the VR headset from the start of that stream, and then I did the last 90 minutes at the end. And the intention was to try and give you a variety of experiences in the headset so that you could have a proper informed conversation today about what you thought of it. You did a multitude of games.
Yep.
Lots of different varieties of games, so we'll talk about those in a moment. But what I thought we'd start with is, and probably the most obvious thing to discuss, is the hardware. So there's two real components to this. There's the headset itself, which connects directly to the PlayStation 5, and then the new Sense controllers. So I thought I'd start with the headset, Robbie, and ask you for your first impressions. What did you make of it? How did it feel? Quality, etc.
When I first put it on, I actually didn't think it was that comfortable. It's probably because I was wearing it wrong, though. So it's got this halo, so there isn't a top strap over the top, which I suppose... I'm trying to think if my other headset actually has that now. But it felt...
So the Quest, you're looking over my shoulder at the Quest Pro, that doesn't, but the Quest 2 does.
Does, yeah. So I think that's what I'm used to, is having the strap on the top to stop it like drooping down. So that took a while to get used to, but once it was on there comfortably, I think the trick is to have it kind of hanging lower than you might have the Oculus.
Yeah, it kind of clamps, doesn't it, like under the lower part of your skull almost, so it's kind of an angle.
Yes, yeah. Once you had it there, it was really quite comfortable. I mean, it must have been for me to have it on for over 3 hours.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because the PSVR 1 was also, at the time, and I still think remains very, very similar actually. And you can see the PSVR is kind of in the distance in the room here. Don't worry, even on YouTube you can't see that. Robbie can see it though. And the technology is very similar. They haven't changed it a huge amount because it worked. And it was that the benefit, I think, with the PSVR 2, is much like the PSVR 1, is that it's lightweight. That halo distributes the weight more evenly around your head. And it allows you to wear it for a lot longer, in my opinion. I mean, I did 90 minutes last night just because it was late and we were tired. I could have gone for longer. I've honestly had the Quest Pro on for less than about 30 minutes and I'm getting a pain in the head where it's squeezing or the weight is too much. Obviously the PSVR is significantly lighter because there's less tech in it. All the graphical processing and the grunt work is done by the PlayStation, so that does allow them to make that headset lighter, but I think it really benefits from that.
100%. It was really quite comfortable. The gasket on the front as well, it's like I guess a gasket is the only way really to describe it, but that kind of surrounds your eyes and it's like a soft rubberish texture, so it's really good for blocking out the light as well as being quite comfortable and resting nicely on your face. That really helped with the comfort levels as well. The only thing I'd say is it did get a bit warm in there, and I wore my glasses the entire time as well, so that's good to note for anyone who needs to wear glasses during VR.
Yeah, and that's because the lenses are on like a slider, aren't they? So unlike VR where you kind of strap it on and then you adjust in just the headband, the PSVR has the headband adjustment, but then you slide the glasses forward, as you say, and that concertina gasket then, regardless of where you need it to sit, will block out the light. Yeah, and that's actually a slight upgrade on the PSVR 1. So the PSVR 1 had the gasket, the rubber gasket. It felt very good, but it didn't concertina, so it was kind of fixed. So although you had that sliding and forward and backwards mechanism again for the glasses wearers, and they got a lot of praise for that then as well, rightly so, that gasket didn't concertina, so you didn't always get the best shutout of light. What I think's nice with the gasket, though, you mentioned the heat. I didn't really notice it too much. I've certainly felt that sort of the heat worse in the Meta headsets that I've experienced, and that may be again because of the amount of tech and the heat that it's generating. But I also think that gasket doesn't feel like it's pressing on you.
That's right.
You don't come away with it with like rings, whereas if you put the Quest on, you quite often will come away with a nice VR mask that sort of shows that you've had something pressed on your face for an hour.
I think the only thing I'd say about the heat is that the reason I noticed it is more because I think my glasses started to fog up towards the end a little bit.
Right, yeah. I mean, you did look a little sweaty at the end. You emerged from the 3 hours.
To be fair, the last game I played Was it the last one? Yeah, it was the last one.
Yeah.
Was the most intense one, and we'll get onto that in a
Yeah.
bit. But that's probably what.
And I think you said a little
caused
bit of
a bit of
motion
stress.
sickness at certain points, and that will also make your body heat temperature
True.
rise. And so, yeah, okay.
Very true.
So we talked about the sort of the I guess the plastics and the mechanisms for putting it on. Once you got it on, how did you find the sort of visual quality, the lenses, and I guess things like the IPD adjustment?
It was very sharp, I'd say. Really, really sharp. Much more sharp than I'm used to for a headset. It has that rendering where your eyes look, so it has eye tracking in there. So it renders.
I think it's foveated rendering is their official term. I've got no idea what that means, but yeah.
So it has that in there, which means that it doesn't render the full detail of an image that you're not looking at. So it only renders the sharpest images where your eyes are looking at. And I actually think I might have even seen it on the fringes. Like you can see, generally in your peripheral vision, it's not as sharp as directly where you're looking anyway. But I still felt like I could perhaps see the fringes of where it was maybe not as sharp, just because of where my eyes were looking. So that's one thing to know. But I did think it was very sharp. Wherever I was looking, seemed very, very sharp, much more sharp than.
And the eye tracking's pretty fast as well, isn't it? So you got the chance to try out the little eye tracking, I guess the test or configuration menu, and that's really quite efficient as well. I mean, it's really quick.
It is.
It's hard to catch it out.
And in the games as well, some games that make use of it, I think the Zombieland one that we played ended up using that, because when you're looking at spots for a long enough time, it starts to move you there. That was very fast as well. So I was really impressed with the eye tracking. A really, really good screen.
There's a new horror experience that's coming to it. I think it's either out now or it's coming very soon. And it's from the people that made there was a horror game for the last PSVR which was really popular at launch. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it uses eye tracking in a really interesting way.
Ooh.
So you're in a particular room and it's full of these mannequins, creepy looking mannequins, and every time you blink they move closer to you. And
I've seen
that?
I've seen
so
videos of it.
The idea is to get through it with as fewer blinks as possible, because the more you blink, the faster they come at you, and then eventually they're on top of you and they kill you.
Was that a non-VR title beforehand?
No, this is dedicated VR.
Oh, okay.
This is pure VR. So if the name comes back into my head, I'll tell you what it is, but I can't remember off the top of my head what the name of the game is. But it's a very interesting concept.
The scary games, I have to say, in VR are pretty terrifying. Not gonna lie. I usually don't get spooked by scary games, but that was pretty intense. One of the games that we played, and we'll get onto that in a bit.
So we've talked about the VR, the quality of the lenses. You've touched a bit on then the eye tracking, which I think is really impressive. Is there anything else about the headset you wanted to sort of pick up on?
I suppose the adjustments was really good. So changing the distance between the eyes for the cameras, not the cameras, the screens was really, really good. And the distance between pushing them away from your face and closer to your face, where if you needed that as well. The other thing that I thought was really useful is there's a button underneath that is dedicated. If you press that button, it shows the room around you. And Oculus have a version of this, but it's not as easy to access. It's a dedicated button on there, which I found really, really useful. If you need to move around the room or check where you are in case you're about to hit something, it's really useful to just quickly toggle that button, have a look around the room, and just readjust yourself based on that. So I found that actually really, really useful.
It's also a much clearer camera than what I've experienced on Meta. The Meta devices, even the Quest Pro, which has a colour pass-through, is nowhere near as clear as what you see on the PSVR 2. There is that capability to activate the pass-through on the new headset, the Quest Pro, but it's a double tap, and there's no physical button, and it's really annoying because you can do it by accident or it doesn't respond. That function button on the PlayStation headset, I think, is much more convenient. You can also remap that. So if you don't need the pass-through, you can remap it to other functions, a limited number of functions, but you can change it. So if you wanted to do something different, you can also change what it does.
Yeah.
Also with the eye tracking, worth mentioning, the IPD adjustment you talked about, that actually uses eye tracking to help you get the perfect position, which I think is really clever, because apparently it only needs to be slightly out, and you might not be able to perceive that change, but by being slightly out of place, it can create more issues around motion sickness and comfort in VR. Yeah. So actually getting that perfect alignment and using eye tracking to position that in just the right spot, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, that was very clever.
So headset-wise, I think sounds like a general thumbs up from you. A very
Absolutely.
positive reception there, and I would say the same. It's certainly, of the recent headsets I've worn, I've had the Quest 2 on an awful lot recently. The Quest Pro is really not that comfortable, unfortunately. It uses a similar Halo system, but the weight on your head is really uncomfortable. I've not had any pain from the PSVR 2. The only thing that's taken me out of the PSVR headset is motion sickness, which we'll come on to later on, and that's more software related and to do with my comfort in VR rather than the headset. So big thumbs up for the headset. What about the Sense controllers? So previously with PSVR, we had the interesting application of the PS3 Move controllers, which were the sort of
they look like Wii remotes.
They're like Wii remotes with big coloured balls on the top, didn't they? And most of the setup of that with the cameras and everything else was quite complicated. This now uses inside-out tracking, so the cameras are on the headset, and the Sense controllers are tracked by the headset. How did you find those new dedicated Sense controllers?
They're great. I mean, I'm used to this style of controller. It's very similar to what you might have on a MetaQuest or an Oculus Rift, something like that. So they're very, very good controllers. What I will say is, what I wasn't expecting, and I can't remember if you mentioned it beforehand, but the adaptive triggers, I completely forgot that would be on there, as it is on the PS5. So the adaptive triggers, the resistance changes depending on the game that you're playing.
Yep.
And so for the shooting games, you'd really feel the trigger as you're pulling it. And it was just an added immersion that I really wasn't expecting, and it really, really helped me get into the game even more. But yeah, really fantastic controllers. They're very comfortable to use. A little tricky to get to some of the buttons and maybe a bit of the analog stick, but other than that, I think they were really great controllers.
Yeah, and I think we've both got quite large hands relative to probably your Joe Public, and I think that I would say the same. Passing your hand kind of through the tracking ring and then gripping the analog stick rather than the tracking halo kind of being above the controller is an interesting way to do it. It looks very stylish. They look very cool. If you haven't seen one, check it out. Check them out online. There's some really good stuff, on the PlayStation website. But I must admit the triggers were all fine. Like the wraparound of your hand was fine. I found it sometimes a little bit challenging to get my thumb onto some of the face buttons. The analog stick wasn't such an issue for me, but the face buttons certainly, I sometimes would catch that halo with the back of my thumb. But I think that's just to do with the size of my hands, really, rather than anything that the controller is doing wrong. And it wasn't a showstopper. In fact, I would almost say I didn't notice it at all yesterday.
Yeah.
It was only my first initial gameplay that I noticed it.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, the adaptive triggers is a fantastic kind of addition. Yeah. Really interesting experience. Again, it's a bit like VR, but itself is hard to describe if you haven't experienced it. Describing how the adaptive triggers works and feels is also really difficult if you've never experienced it, trying to explain how that works. I mean, if you've got access to any friends or if you've got a PS5 yourself, Astro's Playroom is a really great way to see how those things work and just to try that out. They do a great job of sort of demoing that hardware. But again, if you get a chance to drop into a PSVR 2, then look forward to that experience because it's really cool.
Yeah, I'm really glad that developers are actually making use of this as well. It feels like one of these features that quite easily could have been forgotten about by any developers who are making games for the PlayStation 5. But the fact that they're really making use of it, and it's not just, every gun has the same resistance. Even some games, the guns, as you change guns, the resistance of the triggers and the feel of reloading them and things like that are completely different. So I really, really appreciate that they're taking full advantage of this new hardware.
And one of the things I've not experienced before when it comes to gunplay in VR, not that I've got a massive experience with that, but from the limited games that I've played on different headsets, I'd not come across the implementation of pulling or sort of cocking the analog stick to release the mags or to sort of load the weapon. I really like that implementation, and we saw that not only in the Zombieland game, which we'll come on to, but also in, I think, Resident Evil had a similar mechanism. So I really like that idea of kind of bringing the analog stick into that experience and making the assembly of weapons or the reloading of weapons an active part of the experience, because it does make it more immersive.
It does.
Than just pressing X to reload. You get something more out of the game, I think, by doing that.
Yes, you do. Added stress, I think, when it comes to reloading as you're shooting zombies or whatever.
But again, I guess that deepens the immersion.
It does.
You're having to panic a little bit. You're having to remember to perform certain moves, whereas before you just press a button. I think that's great. Okay, so I think from a hardware perspective, there's not a huge amount more to say. I will just quickly add that I bought the charging station with my PSVR 2. It has had mixed reception. I think the headset and the controllers have been very well received. This charging dock less so. I would agree that it's not the greatest implementation of wireless charging or sort of this kind of charging dock. Effectively, what it comes with are two very small USB-C connectors that are magnetized that you put into the VR Sense controllers, and then the idea is that you rest them on the dock and then they kind of magnetize. They are similarly bad in the way that the MetaQuest Pro and its charging dock are. The magnets, for whatever reason, just don't feel strong enough. They don't kind of pull the controller into place.
Yeah.
And as a result, last night actually, when we switched over to the hand control, to the typical PS5 controller, and we docked those, we found out we'd only docked one of them, and the other one hadn't been charging as we thought it had.
Yeah.
So I think that charging dock isn't the best, and for £40, I actually think that there are potentially better third-party solutions on the market that are already coming out. So if you are looking to buy a PSVR 2, possibly do a little bit of research if you're going to buy a charging dock. I think they are essential, because I don't want to be plugging them in with cables. There's the convenience to having them kind of docked with my VR kit, but have a look around and see if there's a better one for you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the games then, because that's what sells these units, and the hardware's all well and good, but if the software's rubbish, no one's going to buy it. We started you out with something relatively sedate to get you warmed up, and you started with Zombieland Headshot Fever.
Yes.
Which is a bit of an arcade-style time trial zombie shooting experience with a bit of a cel-shaded art style. How did you find that? What would you take?
It was great. It was a film I'm quite familiar with as well, so it was good to see some of the characters in there. But the actual shooting mechanism, this was another one of those games that took advantage of the adaptive triggers and the reloading as well, with the flicking of the analog stick.
Yep.
I started on the shooting range and had a little go of the shooting there before going at the first level of the zombies, and it was really quite immersive. I really enjoyed it. I wasn't feeling any motion sickness or anything until there is parts of the game where it moves you forward quite rapidly, and it's not a flash as in like a teleport as it moves forward. Sometimes it will move you forward just rapidly, and that is when I started to feel a little sick, and I thought I was going to fall over as it rapidly moved forward and stopped. I even you may even see it if you watch it on the stream, as I'm a bit kind of wobbly. But other than that, it was really, really quite good, and quite a fun introduction to this VR, arcade shooting of zombies.
Yeah, I think it's a really great starter game. I'll be honest, I wasn't going to pick it up. I looked at the screenshots and the videos, and I thought, this is not really for me. And then I watched another YouTuber, Beardo Benjo, I'll call him out, so that other people can go and check his content out. Really good VR YouTube content creator, and he played it, and he was just glowing about it as a sort of a great intro for people who've not played VR before, because it doesn't require lots of movement. Your experience actually with the motion sickness is not something that I'd had, but everyone's different. But it's relatively straightforward. There's not even a lot of sort of 360-degree movement. A lot of it is just kind of what's in front of you and a little bit off to the left and right when you're sort of picking off zombies as they approach. So I think that helps to keep you orientated. And it's a really fun, fast kind of pick up and play arcade experience, isn't it? You're playing. Each level is sort of 1 to 1.5 minutes, broadly speaking. And it's all about time trials and competing, isn't it?
Yeah.
We were doing a bit of that last night. In fact, where you were beating my top scores, and then I came back in and tried to beat yours. So, yeah, I think it's a really good experience. It's £20, so it's not not a full price kind of £60-70 game. I think for £20, it's a good experience, and it's one that if you've got this hardware and you want something that just gives you a reason to be able to pop it on for half an hour or less, this is the game to go for. It doesn't require a huge investment in time. It's very easy to put on if you're time poor and just have a quick go.
I think it's a big thing for anyone who wants to get any friends or family excited about VR. It's always a challenge to think of a game that can get them started and get them actually quite comfortable with it before delving into the more intense games. So this one I think is a really good one for that. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was really good. We played a variety of games. We're going to move through them. Not all of them were purchased, so some of these were demos. So we'll call that out where we were just playing the demo release, because that obviously does differ from a full game. So the next one was a demo, and we moved you on to, by the choice of our Twitch chat, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Yep. What did you make of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge? And I've not played that one for record, so entirely your input here.
The graphics were fantastic. So for context, the Zombieland was more of a cartoon-style graphics, whereas the Star Wars was more of a realistic. You were in a kind of cantina, and you are walking around interacting with various objects in there, and it's really quite detailed. There's a lot of objects you can pick up and move around. There was even some drums / keyboard thing that you could hit with a stick, which was really fun to play as well. Lots of things to interact with and walk around, and the graphics were really fantastic, really quite immersive. There's a few characters in there that speak to you as well. There was one scene that you start with, which was in a kind of cantina bar, which is lots of things to walk around, and then you can go outside, which gives you this vast kind of canyon style area that you can walk around, and you even start to shoot some generated enemies that come towards you as well. So a really good looking game, a really fantastic looking game. It was the demo, so we didn't get a whole lot of actually storyline or anything to play, just kind of generally objects to interact with. and a few kind of mini games plotted around it was like a futuristic darts that we played in the bar.
Which is, again, worth checking out the clip on Twitch for, because it did take you quite a long time to work out how to play that, which is not your fault, but it was quite funny to watch as you
didn't know you clipped
missed
that.
over and over and over again. I did clip it. I think I clipped you successfely doing it though, rather than
that's all right. I'll allow that one.
You'll have to scrub through the full Twitch stream. I think that, and interestingly, if you've, I've been fortunate enough to go to Florida and go to Disney World, and the Galaxy's Edge experience there. When you were in the cantina looking out over Galaxy's Edge.
Yeah.
Now I don't know whether the game is sort of laid out in line with Galaxy's Edge, the experience at Disney, or whether Disney is following something that's more canon, and the two of them are based on the same. But it was really weird looking down on that experience and thinking, I've been there. I've stood there in Disney World. I've been to the sort of the representation of that, and I thought it was really interesting to watch it. We did have some troubles with the hand tracking on one of the controllers, which
my left
for some
arm
reason you
disappeared.
lost the left arm, didn't you? So we fixed it fairly easy by just turning the sense controllers off and back on again. Your typical IT fix, but that was a little bit weird. So
we thought it was part of the trial, is that you only get one arm to interact with.
And I think it's worth calling that out though, because none of these things are perfect. And I know that tracking issues with the controllers and these headsets on any of the devices can be a problem. So worth being, I think, honest about that experience. As you said, it was only a demo though, so we couldn't do a huge amount. But then, again, at the behest of our Twitch chat, we moved you to a seated position. We swapped the Sense controllers for the traditional PS5 controller, and we dropped you into Gran Turismo 7. So for those who don't know, Gran Turismo 7 was released, I think, it's a good year or more ago now. It's not like it's a new VR game, but they have patched in, as part of the latest update, full VR support for racing in that game. So all your menu systems, that's still very much sort of flat when you're in the headset, but every race now can be played in VR, which is incredible. It's way above what they managed with PSVR 1 and GT. So we sat you down and we got you racing. How did you find Gran Turismo 7?
Absolutely incredible. I am not a big fan of racing games. I'm terrible at them generally. But this was so immersive. You literally sat in the car, and I had to stop myself being distracted from the interiors of these different cars that we were trying out. I started out on a fairly kind of normal, modern hybrid car, which just looked like the inside of any old car, which again was really detailed and beautiful to look at as well. But then we started on some classic cars as well. So I was sat inside an old 60s Mini, and then an old Volkswagen Beetle as well. And the interiors of there were so fascinating to look at. It was like it was just incredible, absolutely incredible. And the racing as well, I should say, was also fun. But I was just highly distracted by the actual visuals of inside the car as well.
Yeah, I'm like you. I'm not a driving fan normally, and I haven't played a Gran Turismo since Gran Turismo 3, which is the PS2. So I'm way detached from that series. I've dabbled with a bit of Forza on the Xbox over the last few years, but very, very lightly, really. I was completely immersed as well when I played it separately from last night's stream. I played for about an hour or so. I haven't had a huge amount of time to play it, any of it really, but I loved it. Yeah, the immersion. It got me excited about playing a racing game again, and it made me want to collect the cars. It made me want to go around and try different vehicles out and upgrade them to see how that felt and how that looked internally. Because, like you said, the internals of these cars are stunning. As well as just the environments we didn't get to see, and I haven't yet seen the different weather effects. I've seen videos of other people playing and racing in the rain, and again the idea that the wiper blades go in the rain hitting the windscreen as you're whipping around, and like you said, as you turn around you're seeing everything around that car. It's just incredible.
I think the attention to detail as well with the mirrors, so you can actually look in the wing mirrors to see the cars that you've just overtaken, in the rear view mirror as well to see what's going on there. Just the fact that it's just so immersive, it feels like you're in the car, taking full advantage of everything you can see.
I would absolutely love to try the experience with a proper wheel and pedal rig, because I think that would just be next level immersion. It's obviously a little bit takes you out of the experience a little when you're using an analog stick. But that's another £300 and something investment that probably won't be happening anytime soon. So but keep your eyes peeled. If we do decide to invest in that, one of us ends up with a wheel, we'll talk about it in the future. But for now, I think even without it, just an incredible experience.
Absolutely.
And I think at the moment, there are other games we'll talk about which are system sellers or hardware sellers, but I think Gran Turismo has been a bit of a surprise. There were so many people who have not only bought a PSVR 2 to experience it, but that I'm following on sort of content creators on YouTube and on Twitter and the like, that have also bought the wheel and bought a rig, and a lot of them will say, I didn't really like driving before, but this has pulled me in. It's what I needed to hook me. So yeah, I think if you are driving or a petrol head or a driving enthusiast who's loved these games before, you absolutely need this, because it's going to take your simulation to the next level. If you've tried to build those multi-screen rigs or you've got a wheel already, you need this. If you aren't into racing games, you still need to try it, because I think it's just something special.
Absolutely.
That is very different from anything else you've ever experienced or will experience in VR, to be honest.
I think it is the converter for those who are not a big fan, just because of how immersive it is and how fun it is to drive these cars.
How did you find the motion sickness side of the racing? Did you get anything at all through Gran Turismo?
I didn't actually. I didn't. And I know you've mentioned you've had a bit of an experience with that, but I
Just a
actually
small
felt
bit,
fine with that one. I hadn't. The only sickness experience I'd felt between the two games was just the moving forward in Zombieland, but that was absolutely fine for me.
Yeah, and I didn't have a huge amount of problem with Gran Turismo. I thought I would. It was a bit of a concern. I think the only times it really affected me was when I would perhaps go around a corner in one direction then quickly snap back to the other, and that sudden like jerking of movement, my body was almost expecting to feel something that it didn't, and that's when it kind of threw me out. But overall, very little. I'd like to get into some faster cars and see whether that makes a difference, because we were driving some pretty sedate vehicles really in the early parts of the game, so we need to get onto the sports cars and try that. But yeah, no, not too bad at all. So if you are worried about the motion sickness side, I don't think Gran Turismo is a massive issue. Certainly wasn't for me. Okay, so then when Gran Turismo finished, I think we moved on to what would be your final experience from memory of the evening. So this was quite a long stretch. I think this ended up being about an hour.
Right.
So we moved you into another system seller, which is Resident Evil Village. Again, not a dedicated VR game, but one that has been lovingly converted for VR.
Yep.
And I think actually probably benefits from VR in a way that the normal game couldn't. So, do you want to tell us about Resident Evil Village? And I mean, I will say that for anyone watching or who wants to go back and watch the stream, this was the best hour of the night for me. And I laughed a lot. And Robbie's reactions are worth going to watch the stream for. So if you have the time to go and clip that bit, go and watch even just like half an hour of that Resident Evil Village bit will be funny for you. But what was it like being in the headset?
Well, as I say, I'm not the big... I like don't really get scared from scary games like horror games usually, but because of the immersion, this really took it up to the next level. And it was really, really immersive. One thing I would say, and I had to fiddle with the settings to get this working, is it made me feel the most sick out of all of the games. The movement is an analog movement, so you move forward, so you're walking forward, and it's something between the disconnect of moving in the game and not moving in real life. The physical sensation of moving is what makes you feel sick, and it really made me feel sick. As you were moving forward, it feels like you should be leaning forward a little more, and as you stop, it feels like you should be like almost toppling over. So I was wobbling quite a bit, to the point where I was like hands on my knees, bending over, feeling a little sick, taking a couple of breaths. But then we discovered in the settings, this is something I've not done before. I haven't really had this motion sickness as bad as it has been in that game, but there is a kind of vignette or a tunneling effect that you can toggle the severity up and down on the system. And what that does is, as you're moving, it brings in the vision of what you're looking at to a kind of a circle in the middle, like a vignette comes in, closes in. And what that does is it almost feels like you're looking at a cutscene from a distance as you're walking, and it takes you a bit out of the immersion, but not too much. And it still keeps you in the game, but stops you feeling sick. And it really, really worked for me. It's my first experience with this kind of vignette, and then we spotted on a couple of other games, but it really, really does work. So for anyone who's feeling a bit worried about the motion sickness on VR, maybe you've had experience with VR before and experienced that motion sickness, there are tools these days that do help. Often games need to adopt them, but this is one that does have them, and it was really fantastic, and it kept me in the game, and I would have given up far earlier if that feature wasn't available.
Yeah, I mean, as an outside observer yesterday, I was worried, one, that you might go face first into any number of the collectible things around this room, and Robbie's a very tall man, so I don't want 6'5" of him crashing into my office.
There's lots of things I could break around here as well.
But also, I must admit, I thought he's coming out now. That's he's not going to be able to cope with this. You did look like, or the way you were talking suggested you were feeling quite sick. So you dealt with it very well, and then by, as you said, adjusting those settings, you seem to find your VR legs again, and then you played on for another 45, 50 minutes without too much trouble.
Absolutely.
I think it was really. Those features, as you say, are really essential. The other thing that a lot of people will say is if you're struggling with motion sickness in VR, is that one of the things you can do is just to dial it up a little at a time. So I mean, you went in 3 hours straight into this headset. That's pretty hardcore, and the last hour that you spent in the most intense game.
Yes.
So that's quite intense. They suggest almost building up, so sort of 15 minutes, half an hour, an hour. Start with lighter experiences, a bit like we did, and then move on to the hardcore stuff. Don't just put the headset on and go straight into Resident Evil Village and then expect to be perfectly fine, because for a lot of people they'll find it disorientating. So obviously you've talked about the kind of the hardware and the software and the experience and the motion sickness side, but what about the game itself?
The game itself, wow, that was it was pretty terrifying, not gonna lie. I don't want to do any spoilers or anything, so I figured out all the settings with the motion sickness in the demo trial area, where it trains you how to pick up the guns and load them and shoot and everything. You get a bit of a shooting range, and all the other things like healing yourself and getting the light from your jacket and wielding a knife and
it's
things
very
like
much
that.
like a perv jacket, isn't it? You have to sort of grip the jacket and kind of, it's a flasher jacket almost.
It is, yeah.
And then your light's inside it, yeah.
So some funny clips on the stream of me just like flapping backwards and forwards trying to grab this coat. So we did all that. I've got the settings all sorted, and then we moved on from the training into the actual game itself, which is incredibly creepy. It starts you off in a very dark area in the snow, and you're walking in the snow for quite a while, and there's some pretty horrific things that you come across in the whole time. It's very suspense building, so there wasn't anything particularly jump scary that got me.
Yeah. Apart from the crow on the leash,
there was a crow that screamed at me.
Pretty creepy, yeah.
But I was like hands on my knees, not for sickness this time, just from stress of the actual game. But I did manage to stick through to the end of the demo. It's one of these games where I feel like I couldn't put it down. Once you started, it was really quite addictive, and I wanted to see it through. It was very suspense building. It was very you go around picking up objects and trying to collect things to progress to various other stages, like opening gates with like bolt cutters and things like that. You meet other characters, and you see kind of flashes of creatures in the corner of your eye. It really does a lot of that to try and freak you out. But it was really, really fantastic. Really scary, I'd say. And again, I'm not usually scared from games, but this one, because of how immersive it was and the suspense it built over time, it ultimately ended with quite a dramatic scare at the end and a bit of shooting, which was very fun actually, but very stressful because the reloading mechanic in that is quite fiddly, as it should be, as it would be in real life, just adding to the immersion. But really fantastic game.
Far braver man than me. There's a reason why it's only a demo that's on my console, is because I can't bring myself to pay for it, because I know I won't play it. I'd love to be able to sit and play it, but I'm not good in those situations. So I thought you did very, very well. I would have used the motion sickness as an excuse to get my ass out of there, to be honest, because it was fairly clear fairly early on what kind of experience that was going to be, and I think you did really well to get through it. So yeah, well done on that. And at that point, I think you'd had enough then. So 3 hours, you were getting a bit hot and sweaty. You came out, and I went in. So short adjustment on some of the settings, just got the IPD setting. I've got a much larger head than Robbie, so we had to get the eyesight right. I do also wear glasses for certain use cases, typically using screen, so I put my glasses on, and I've had, again, no problem with that whatsoever. We should say one bit of hardware we didn't talk about, it's not essential to the PSVR, was the headset. So we also had the Pulse headphones on.
Oh yes, yeah, the
from
headphones.
a sound perspective. Now we had them turned quite low so we could hear each other, so we weren't really getting the full immersion of those, but again, they comfortably sit over the headset. I didn't notice any kind of squeezing or pressure that was exerted by them, so they all seem to have been designed nicely together to work.
Yeah, that really made it more immersive. Even though we had the volume down, I can imagine if you had the volume up, you'd be fully in the Matrix at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So I moved into the headset then, and I put Call of the Mountain on, or Horizon Call of the Mountain. That's, again, one of their sort of system selling that you can buy the VR2 bundled with that if you want to, for the extra 50-something pounds that costs. I will say it is a tech demo. I think they'll call it a full experience. It is, I think, sort of like 5, 6, 7 hours, something like that, end to end. So, it's a decent length game, and that's probably enough for me when it comes to games. I'm not one who wants 100 hours of gameplay. I don't have the time for it. But in terms of what it's doing, a lot of it is quite gimmicky, and there's a lot. It's been said in all the reviews, so I won't labour on it, but there's a lot of climbing, which kind of absorbs a lot. It feels like a lot of padding. But I think the whole point is that it's showing you the scale, the grandeur, and the graphical power of the PSVR 2. It's very pretty. The colour palette is very bold and vibrant, very contrasting to Resident Evil.
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
The archery is fun. It definitely uses eye tracking to help you with your aim a little bit, so you feel like an absolute badass. You feel like Hawkeye. You can't miss. I'm only a couple of hours into that game. I've done the kind of intro tutorial bit and then the first level, really, or the first mission. There's a lot more still to come, so I've got many hours left to enjoy that. I don't mind the climbing, I will say. It doesn't bother me. I actually think it's quite a nice feature, and I'm not looking for something that is intense like Resident Evil. For me, that kind of VR experience is being teleported to somewhere else. In this example, it's somewhere very beautiful with robot dinosaurs. I'm all in for that. That's why I loved Horizon Zero Dawn in the first place. It was amazing locations and robot dinosaurs. So that's exactly what this is. Very graphically impressive. For me, I don't think it's the best game I've got on the PSVR 2. I think that for me, Gran Turismo probably is the most impressive experience that I can see myself putting the most time into. But Call of the Mountain definitely up there. Again, one to show your friends. We did discover there's a sort of setting when you can go on effectively a little river cruise, which is pure
like a roller coaster.
You just sit there, and you just float along a river, and they show you loads of robots, and you experience what that game's got to offer. That's the kind of thing you can put your friends in and go, press play, off you go. And one thing we should talk about, which is really nice about the PlayStation VR 2, and I guess PC VR must do the same, but you don't get this so easily with the Quest and their cordless devices, is the ability to have other people observe what you're doing. So I could sit in the office. We obviously streamed it, so that was great. But I had it on the big TV in my office, so I was watching what you were doing and able to enjoy that with you. Whereas when someone puts the Quest headset on, especially if you're trying to help them as well, it's impossible to guide them because you can't see what they can see. So you find yourself describing menus going, you should be able to see an icon. It's up the left. No, it's not that. It's further to the right. And it's really frustrating. Whereas with this, I actually could use the controller. I was hopping you in and out of games, making that transition seamless, so you could just enjoy the playing. And I think that's a really nice thing when it comes to sharing this experience with other people. I think that helps a lot.
One thing I will say about the climbing, and I think I said this last night as well, is that it's an interesting take on movement in the game, because I think a lot of the other games are focusing on moving traditionally like you would with an analog stick, moving forward and back and left and right and everything. But I think this, because it wants to be more immersive, perhaps that's why it's getting you to do the climbing, because it's very physical. You're moving your arms up and down, and you're in the game a bit more because of that, rather than using the analog stick more. So I think that's perhaps why they're doing it.
It's a really good point, actually. And in fact, one of the options in the game, and there was a lot of fear when the game was first tech demoed that this was going to be the only way to move, was to sort of actually physically move with your arms and kind of run. and you can do that. But again, I think to your point, it's all trying to make the physical movements match the virtual movement. The only time, in fact, in Horizon where I felt slightly queasy or noticed a little bit of, that was a bit of a moment, was moving with the analog sticks, more traditional video game movement. I've never had that in any way during the climbing. And even the sort of zip lines, which are great fun, we noticed last night, perhaps because we were aware of them through Resident Evil, that vignetting effect, which helped you with when you get up to speed. The vignetting was auto applied to try and reduce the impact of that zip line and that motion. So, and
then even took a while to cool down once you'd landed from the zip wire as well, which I thought was also a cool effect.
Just to let you kind of find your feet again. And I think the movement, the combat's great fun. It's very satisfying. The archery is a lot of fun. Shooting the bad guys was a lot of fun. We took on a few flying. I can't remember what the characters' names were now. Flintlock, I think they might have been called, the birds. That was great fun. And again, because the eye tracking is helping you with your aim a little bit, you feel really badass because you're hitting them. You repeatedly hit them. There's not that frustration of I've missed again. Even in the Zombieland last night, you hold the pistol in one direction, and quite right, there's a bit of recoil, but you could pull the trigger in what felt like exactly the same position and hit 4 or 5 different spots around them. So this was really good. There's not too much more to say about that. I mean, if you want to know more about it, there's loads of stuff on YouTube. You can go and watch loads of content to go and have a look at. I think it's a must if you're going to buy a PSVR 2, in my opinion, at the moment. It's £60. It's a lot. Don't know if it's worth £60. I don't know that any VR experience is worth £60 if you can only play it in VR. I think where things like Gran Turismo 7 and Resident Evil shine is that they are the games that you can play in both. So if you don't want to put your headset on but you want to carry on your driving career, you can pop in and drive. You don't have to put the headset on. If you want that next level of immersion, you strap the headset on and it's exactly the same save game, exactly the same progress. I think Resident Evil works the same way, although I must admit I haven't tested that theory. I think you can do, if you buy the full release, I think you can kind of hop backwards and forwards, but don't hold me to that. I don't know that for sure. But to me, I think VR is going to be at its best where a full physical release, a normal game that you might normally buy, a AAA release, has VR as an option, rather than these sort of mini VR experiences, which I do think need to be priced accordingly.
Yeah.
A Headshot Fever for £20 feels like the right kind of price for that.
Yeah.
£60 for Call of the Mountain, bit more of a stretch for me, perhaps. But
Yeah, and you say like a full game, 6 or 7 hours. I think most games these days that you would pay £50-60 for are way more than that.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I don't necessarily feel like the time is the thing for me, because I'm always one making arguments that I want games to be shorter. I don't mind paying £60 for a God of War, for example, and it being a 7 or 8 hour experience, because I'm more likely to finish it. The problem I've got is when it's a 20-hour experience, 50-hour experience, I know I'm probably not going to finish that game, and which means that I won't see it through, and I won't get, for me, that feeling of value. But yeah, I think it feels like a tech demo.
Yeah.
So it's a very good tech demo, but it is a tech demo. We then moved on, so I jumped from, what did I go from? I need to check my notes now as a reminder. Where did I go from Call of the Mountain? Was it straight into
Did you do the Zombie
Fever? Yes, it was Zombieland. So I jumped into Zombieland. That was my second time. I only had like half an hour or so with it previously. Had a crack at some of your scores. Didn't beat them initially. Struggled. Did eventually, I think, overcome
all of them,
all 3 of them.
Yeah.
But that's through trial and error. Like, again, you'd only had a couple of attempts to set those scores, so I'm sure you'd be able to beat them if you went back.
It feels like one of those games. It's like an arcade game where you want to
Yeah.
compete with your friends to get the best scores.
Yeah, and a part of it was that, I had 3 or 4 attempts at one of them before I eventually beat your score. And once you've done that, within that minute and a half run where you need to make up the time and which bad guys you should be hitting and who you need to headshot, and the kind of when you've missed the shot that's going to cause you a problem. It's really good fun, I have to say. I wasn't expecting it to be as satisfying as it is, but it's up there with one of my favourite experiences so far.
Yeah.
And if you'd have asked me before I received the headset, it wasn't even on my radar. It was, like I say, it was bought off the back of a recommendation because it sounded like it would be good fun, and it really is.
Yeah.
So I won't dwell on it for too long, but I would highly recommend it. We then moved from that onto Song in the Smoke. This was a demo, again, one I've heard a lot about. I believe it's more of a survival game. I can't really critique this one. I think it's unfair for us to critique this one. We only played it for about 20 minutes. It does feel like there's a lot to learn. It's a very much sort of like crafting, collect materials, set fires, maintain your energy levels. You've got to eat, you've got to keep yourself clear of poisonous issues, and you've got to sleep and rest.
Make some tonics.
I think it's one of those that, there's probably a lot more to it if we'd have carried on digging in. And I have heard a lot about it. It's not brand new for PSVR 2, it is a port. Yeah. So it's available on other headsets. But yeah, a little bit too slow pace, and given it was the end, getting towards the end of our stream, I think we both kind of agreed that we'd seen enough of that one.
It was quite a pretty game as well, I think.
Yeah.
It was more cartoon style than the hyper-realistic ones of Call of the Mountain and Resident Evil, and even the Star Wars. But it was really quite pleasant to look at, I think. Yeah, had a nice colour palette. I think it would have been interesting to spend some more time in. I think as a demo, I don't think it does the game justice. So given we played for a good 20 minutes, half an hour, and by the end of it, I think we both agreed, probably earlier than we actually admitted, that we kind of weren't really feeling it. Yeah. I think if you're going to put a demo out there, you need to do something that gets you the hook. Having said that, if that's the game you're looking for and that is the game itself, then there really isn't much more you can do to create the hook. It just wasn't for us. So I think, short amount of time in that game, but not really one that hooked us in. Grateful that I'd only got the demo, even if it is only, I think, £25 in the store. So, again, not a £60 release. And then the last game of last night, but there's a couple of others I wanted to touch on, was Res Infinite. So this was actually an upgrade from the PSVR release, and the game itself is a PS2 era game that I used to own. So it's a music rhythm game, very Tron-like kind of trippy vector graphics feel. It was £8 to upgrade it, so not a huge cost. Okay. And Tetris Effect, was the same. So there's varying ways that developers are handling this. Some are giving free upgrades. So Job Simulator was an entirely free upgrade. Oh, okay. Whereas Res Infinite was an £8 upgrade. Yeah. And then there's things like Moss Book 1, which is on both devices and is entirely, there's no upgrade path at all, and I've got that on. It's a new version.
So mine is locked. Well, it's the same game, but it's a new. They're not offering any kind of upgrade path for people who've got the old version, which is a bit frustrating. So that's not consistently handled across the platforms. But Res was interesting. It was fun. It was as I remember it, a little easier with emotion control than it used to be, kind of with an analog stick dragging a reticule around the screen. So quite easy to get into and pick up and play. Obviously, I've got memories of nostalgia attached to it. I think you were just a bit bemused as to what the hell was going on.
It was very confusing to look at, not going to lie. You were just this little floating man, and there was lots of these things for you to shoot and look at. From my perspective, it just looked like you were looking around at objects to shoot, locking onto them, and then shooting them. To me, it didn't even look like there was much interaction at all, but I obviously couldn't see what you were pressing or looking at. So,
and you're not far off the truth. So it was a 2-button game. It's the analog stick to kind of, well, not even the analog stick. You're waving the sensor controller around and your aim reticule, and then you're just pressing a button to highlight the enemies and then releasing it to lock on. So there's not a lot to it. It does get faster and more intense, but the whole point, I think, is it's meant to be kind of a trippy rhythm experience, because the music starts to build as the level goes on, and as you get better and more intense and deeper into the experience, the rhythm and the music gets sort of faster paced and more energetic. So I think it's meant to be more of an experience than, and it always was, to be fair, on the PS2. The flat version was exactly that. It was just an experience and a rhythm game, a music experience, rather than anything too challenging. So fun to play. I'd never actually played the PSVR one that I bought all those years ago, so it was nice to pay the extra little bit of an upgrade and actually get to use it. I'm not sure I'll be racing back and dipping in too much. It might be one I'll pick up and play if I get a bit bored every so often. But
feels like another one of those arcade games as well. That you might you don't have to take it too seriously to pick up and play.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I'm grateful it didn't cost a lot. So yeah, Res Infinite was another one that you could try out. I wouldn't race out and spend your money on that though. For me, there's other better games. The other two, just to mention, I mentioned Tetris Connect very briefly there, just from an upgrade point of view. I haven't tried it on the PSVR 2 yet. However, it is literally Tetris in a sort of 3D world. So lots of colour, lots of visual things happening. The levels change and the backgrounds and the scenes change as you get further into the game, but it is Tetris. So there's nothing else to it. The other one to mention, which we didn't get to but we had planned to try last night, was Kayak Mirage. I haven't actually started that game yet because just being in the paddling pool tutorial area, which is literally like swimming baths, has made me feel a little bit motion sick. But I have tried it standing up, so what I would like to do is try sitting down and playing that game in a seated position, because I hear fantastic things. I think visually it's one of the best.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like graphically it's supposed to be very, very pretty and sort of photorealistic, and if you get into the jungle scape or the Arctic, the scenery is supposed to be stunning, but it's very sedate. It's very much a kind of an experience. But it's the fact that it's sedate is what threw me, because it was the motion, not of the sort of general paddling and the movement. That's fine. What got me, and again this is perhaps a trend for me when it comes to motion sickness in VR, was the sudden jerking movement. So when you were paddling and then you're told to suddenly pull a right and you have to spin the boat very quickly, that was when I struggled. That's when it got me. And I suddenly went, ooh,
and that was the same in Gran Turismo as well. The kind of corners,
the sudden motion, not normal cornering was fine, and even tight cornering wasn't a problem. It was the one way and then suddenly snapping back the other,
right?
That got me. And I think with Kayak Mirage, you're suddenly going in one direction, and then you stick your oar in, and all of a sudden the boat jerks, and your view snaps. And I think that's what got me. So one to watch for me, I guess, just to learn from an adapt to, but yeah, absolutely worth it. And again, fairly cheap. I think it's about £20.
Oh, okay.
So cool. not a full blown title there at all. Just kill whatever that call is coming through. So we are getting towards the end of the content we wanted to talk through, Robbie. I guess probably just worth thinking about quickly what's coming next for PSVR. So at the moment, I think it's a very busy month of March. There seems to be a lot of titles coming, lots of stuff to be excited about. There's nothing particular on my hit list. I'll put my hands up and say that now. I've got travel plans and I've got other things that I'm buying this month, so I'm not buying too much more for my PSVR 2 at the moment, unless there's something that comes out that just feels like a must buy. I'll be waiting now for a few things to hit sale and try and pick a few of these titles up a bit cheaper, mainly because I think I'll be trying to double dip on Gran Turismo. I want to get through Call of the Mountain. But yeah, anything that you're aware of that's sort of come into the VR space that you're I mean, this is not your headset as such, but I know you're tempted.
I am very tempted, and I think that's the takeaway from this experience is, well, one, I don't have a PS5, so that's one thing that I'd have to get to play it. But this is the best VR experience I think I've had, so it has made me very tempted to get the whole bundle of PS5 and the headset. I haven't been looking at any games that are coming specifically to the PS2 VR or PSVR 2, sorry. But yeah, really excited for what's to come. I think the developers taking advantage of the adaptive triggers and the various immersion techniques are really, really interesting. And because it's such new hardware, I'm just excited to see where it goes generally. I mean, I'll be honest, I hope you do go on to purchase one, because one thing I've not had a chance to experience much of at all is multiplayer VR. Obviously I don't need you to own one to play multiplayer, but it's always nice to play with someone that you know. For me, I like to play multiplayer games with people that I know.
and it would be really fascinating to jump into Gran Turismo, for example, and have a race, or to look at, there are sort of co-op zombie shooters and survival games that could be quite good fun to play with somebody else. So I'd like to experience that in the future. Maybe one to watch if we do find ourselves in that position. We'll try and maybe do a stream, or we'll try and share some content around it and see what we can do. But keep your fingers crossed, viewers. Maybe he'll do it. I think then in that case then we can probably call this one to a close, Robbie. I think it's been really fascinating to talk it through. I thoroughly enjoyed the stream last night, even just sort of watching you experience some of those games, and grateful that you played through Resident Evil so I didn't have to. There's loads more to come. I'm sure we'll talk about PSVR 2 again in the future. This has brought back for me kind of, and I think for the industry and enthusiasts, an excitement that hasn't been there for VR for a while. We've seen with the devices like the Quest this move to wireless, which is great and has its benefits, but of course you lose the power of PC plus VR. This is that sweet spot. It's much simpler than the PSVR to set up. It's probably more affordable than PC VR, and because it's
for the high end ones, definitely.
One thing I have heard a lot of people talk about, which is perhaps in the favour of a console VR rather than PC, is that even with some of these games which are compatible with PC VR, people have talked about having real issues, like with the frame rates and trying to and the actual smoothness of the experience. And because that's very, very difficult for developers to cater for all the different possible PC variations they have to deal with, I guess the benefit of a closed ecosystem like this is that you can fine tune your game for one piece of hardware and push that out to the masses, and know that everyone has the same PS5, the same headset, and therefore you can lock those experiences in and fine-tune them in a way that perhaps PC is harder to do.
It's a classic benefit of a console. It's very much plug and play compared to any faffing around with settings that you might have to do on a PC.
I mean, and even in your situation where a PS5 and the headset is required, okay, you're looking at the sort of slightly over the £1,000 mark, so it's not like it's small amounts of change. But if you compare that to buying a suitable PC headset, and a lot of people go, oh, well, the Quest's only £400. Well, it is, but it's got its limitations. But if you compare this to what it's really comparing to, which I think is PC-grade VR, then actually it is a more affordable entry if you don't already have a really high-powered PC and a suitable headset. So there's all these different permutations to consider. I already had a PS5, so the headset was the only cost. And in fact, if anything, it's given me a greater reason to use my PS5, which I'm grateful for. But everyone's situation, I guess, is different, and consider your own options and what's best for you when you decide what to buy. But for me, the most comfortable and most positive experience of VR I've had in quite a while now, having spent a lot of time in the Quest devices and frankly not been able to deal with the discomfort of them. So this has been great, a real relief for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Okay, well, thank you for joining us on this episode. Obviously, like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Please rate us if you're on one of your podcast services, and make sure to follow us so you don't miss an episode. You can also watch us stream on Twitch at Jay and Robbie. Wherever you choose to consume it, we're grateful to have you there. Please give us your feedback, leave some comments on the YouTube videos. Share your thoughts with us. If you've experienced PSVR 2, tell us what you liked and what you didn't, and whether your experience matches ours. Not everyone's experience will be the same. And until next time, we'll see you again in the future. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.